Welcome, and thank you for joining me tonight. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Jen Grover, and joining me is my very good friend and avid traveler, Net Lamb. So while we're getting started, who else do we have on here today? Go ahead and let me know in the chat if you are on the live stream. I see Mamie, I see Dawn, I see Pat, I see Nancy. Who else do we have? I'm going to let you know right off the bat that there is a little delay between what I see and YouTube. And also, hi, Karen. I have like 3 different screens going, so you're going to see me looking around tonight. I hope that's not too awkward for everybody. I'm going to try to remember to bring my face back to the center so I'm looking at the camera. Hi, Maria. Hi, MJ. Letting people get started here. Let me know not only who's on here, but where you're dialing in from. Hi, Paula from Illinois. Sarah in upstate New York. Excellent. Well, I know some of you are getting some snow, so thanks for joining tonight. I do want to let you know that this is going to be a little different of a format that I've done in the past, but I'm so excited that you're here today because I put quite a bit of thought and planning into this, and I'm hoping that you'll not only have a great time tonight, but hopefully you'll be inspired about your 2024 travel plans. And for those who stick around to the end, I do have a special surprise for you. We have a lot of questions we're going to be asking throughout the night, and we're on camera and you're not. So I'm going to ask for three things from you to help us out. The first is be active in the chat. Like I'm seeing a lot of comments in the chat now, sharing where you're from, and I appreciate that. Also, be curious, ask each other questions, ask Net and I questions. This is a great time to just throw out your questions to the group. And lastly, I don't even need to say this to this group, but because it's the internet, I'm going to say it anyway, and that's be nice, because comments can get misinterpreted when you're in a chat, or Net and I may say something awkward, so be nice. I don't think that's a hard ask. If that resonates with all of you, if you just let me know with either a comment or an emoji in the chat, I would really appreciate it. So I'm going to jump right into the content and let you know how I start a trip planning. Usually I start trip planning with a destination or a few destinations in mind. Now, there are a lot of ways you can be inspired. You could have a campground that you've seen a picture of that you've always wanted to visit, a park that's on your bucket list, a region or state that's caught your interest, or maybe a theme like lighthouses, boats, covered bridges, geology, history, bourbon tours, Route 66 tours. Like the ideas for themes could be endless. If you've started thinking about your travel plans, let us know in the chat where you're thinking about going this year. I'm just taking a second to catch up on all these chats. Hi, Bonnie. Thanks for joining. Hi, Karen. Oh, Net, you're thinking about going to Smoky Mountain National Park?
We'll talk.
Yeah, we'll talk.
I haven't started yet.
New Mexico, Utah, the Southwest. Those are some of my favorite areas. Actually, Tennessee, all of those are areas I've traveled to and love. So New Mexico's sort of an under the radar, beautiful state. I love New Mexico. Oh, Cana, Utah. That's such a great area. Net, you were in that area.
I was. Back in May.
So a lot of travel plans are on the radar. That's great. Last year, Net took a trip to Utah. Net, do you want to talk a little bit about that trip?
Sure. So on my bucket list was always this thing to rent a mini camper, like a camper van, and just do a loop. So I managed to rent the camper van and buy my plane ticket and find my travel partner. Then I called Jen. I'm like, Jen, this is what we want to do. So I continue to be amazed how you can sit and tell me information for like 1 hour, looking at no notes, just your memory, and you help me plan a route for that entire trip. So we started in Las Vegas. We went to all of the Utah National Parks, 5, the whole way over to Moab, and then moved back. And it was a fabulous trip. Everything went beautifully, except when I did things that like Jen told me not to do that. And those are the things I did. Those things that went bad. Not bad, but things I should have listened.
Hey, now I'm seeing in the comments we're getting a lot of feedback from you. Okay. So just something to bear in mind. A lot of echo. You know, Nat, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's one of the things with the new YouTube memberships that are available that I'm able to offer premium members is that type of consultation, whether it be about their trip planning or their tabs. So that's a pretty cool thing to be able to add. I'll just throw this up there briefly. Net's going to put a link in the chat if you're interested in memberships. But I love to help people plan their trips. It's one of my favorite things, as Net can attest to. And I do have a lot of experience planning those trips. I'm seeing a lot of plans to go to Florida, Fort DeSoto. Ooh, that sounds like fun. Seeing a lot of good information sharing going on. I love that. So here's a question for the group. What makes or breaks a trip for you? If you're planning a trip, like what are the things that can either make it amazing or ruin it when you're planning it? Sort of, what is it that creates your ideal experience? I know there's going to be a little delay, so I'm going to use that to catch up on the chat. Hi, Scott. I didn't see you join. You wanted to go to Gulf Shores in March, but the state seems to be sold out for the entire month. I get that a lot about Florida. So people make reservations pretty far in advance. Dawn actually knows a lot about making reservations in Florida, and she's already talked about Camp Nab. We'll probably talk a little bit more about that later because, as Julia pointed out, campgrounds are crowded these days. See, okay, weather can make or break a trip. Yes. Ideal experience, lots of places to see where we camp. Yes. Net, what makes it ideal for you?
Well, for me, there's the feedback. I'm sorry. It's traveling with the right person and having a conversation beforehand about what we each want. And then be out in nature. I can't beat that. Anything outside is going to make me happy.
Well, I think that's important because what you're alluding to is sometimes you travel with other people. I know you have a friend you travel with. Sometimes you travel with Don, your husband. And sometimes I travel alone and sometimes I travel with my sister-in-law. Other people are planning on doing some traveling with me this year. So I think that's one of the key things Net and I were talking about before this session is making sure that you align your idea of what's ideal with other people who may be traveling with you, even if it's people you know fairly well. It's good to just sort of have a precursory discussion about what that ideal experience looks like. You know, do you have to have coffee, showers, bathroom, internet, sports teams? You know, some people in the fall, they can't miss watching their favorite college football team. Driving style or hours you drive in a day can ruin the day. Dietary choices, you know, whether that be, you know, cooking at the campsite or eating out. The amount of sleep that you get can be, there's nothing worse than traveling with somebody who's hangry and sleep deprived. It can make a great trip go south pretty quickly. The amount of planning versus spontaneous and flexibility, and the amount of social interactivity. I'm seeing good hiking trips. Yes, I think good hiking trails is definitely a plus for a trip as well. So I'm curious, you know, how long do most of you drive when you're talking about creating the ideal experience? What's your length of driving in a day? That seems to be a common question. Scott, I agree about the dog friendly, Scott. We don't want Nixie left at home. Yes, Bonnie, dog pet friendly. Not being in a spot too close to your neighbor. Yeah, it seems like sometimes because the campgrounds are so full, I find myself in like KOAs or commercial RV parks a little more frequently, and the close together thing does happen. MJ wants to kayak, no more than 4 hours of driving every night. I see 4 hours. I've seen 4 to 6 hours. I used to be the type of person who would drive 10 to 12 hours a day to get from, I'm traveling from the Midwest all the way out to Colorado. I don't do that so much anymore unless I absolutely have to. I try to keep it around, Google Maps wise, I project around no more than 6 hours, because when you're towing a trailer, it always takes longer. Charlie says 4 hours is ideal. Kristen says 3 to 4. I'm seeing a lot in the ballpark of 4 for every 2 nights. Okay. Goal, less than 3 hours of driving. Man, I can't wait till I'm at that point, but until I'm retired, I probably can't get that short.
Yeah.
That would be so ideal. Pat does 6 to 8. Yeah, 6 to 8 is generally where I'm at these days too, Pat. So now that we've talked a little bit about the ideal experience, let's begin moving toward actually what goes into creating the ideal trip. I'm going to get a little nerdy for a minute and show you a Venn diagram that I borrowed from the business world. And where I think the ideal trip lands is in the middle, where you have desirable, feasible, and viable meet. Do you want to do it? Do you have the means to do it? And in that category, I'd lump, do you have the equipment you need, a camper? Do you have the funds to do it? Do you have the time to do it? The viable is something people often forget, and that's things like, campground closures, or is your favorite part of the park going to be closed due to construction? Those type of outside factors, the weather, wildfires, they can all sort of factor in. But I think it becomes a little more clear whether the trip that you're planning is going to meet those criteria once you start actually getting into itinerary planning. So we're going to start talking about route and itinerary planning next. Asking people how they prefer to navigate is almost like asking them their favorite color. You get so many different answers, and I know that you'll have some people who rely on Google Maps or their navigation system built into their tow vehicle, and other people swear by their paper maps or their atlas, and both have strengths and weaknesses. I'm curious, what do most people on the live chat use? I know I've been digital but carried backup atlases for a number of years. I wish I could join a caravan tour of national parks out west. Pat, we may have to do that for you someday. That sounds like a lot of fun. So as far as GPS goes, I use Google Maps. I've only had 1 to 2 bad experiences with a GPS in all my years of travel, and they weren't horrible once I ended up on the actual Oregon Trail, so that was sort of a cool one. The other one was in the Smoky Mountains. I used my vehicle navigation that got me on this crazy mountain road in East Tennessee and had to do a 3-point turn. I'm seeing a lot of Google Maps, both paper and Google Maps. I think whichever route you go, no pun intended, you would just want to make sure you preview the route and that you understand what the strengths and weaknesses are. I know that, for example, if you're using a paper only, you're not going to get the real-time feedback that a road's closed, maybe due to an accident, or there's a major traffic delay ahead. If you're using just the GPS, it may not, there are routing issues. So it's a good idea to look at the entire route and not just the first turn. Sometimes it's easy to just jump in, tell Google where you want to go, and start driving without previewing the route. But I like to preview. Pat uses Apple Maps. Yes, Dawn, I have an atlas just in case. Yep, I agree. One thing that can help with Google Maps is to download. You can cache the maps for the area before you travel, so that if you're offline, you can still navigate. I see somebody uses the RV Trip Wizard. That seems to be becoming more popular. A lot of the bigger RVs, you see people using the Garmin RV navigation systems quite a bit. So that's a a good thing to think about before you travel. I do want to mention a couple things. The time of year that you're going can impact your route planning, because if you were to plan a trip through Rocky Mountain National Park today and you wanted to go from Estes Park to Grand Lake, the normal route is over Trail Ridge Road. Google Maps isn't going to show you that because Trail Ridge Road is closed all winter. So if you're leaving in the summer, it's going to make you go all the way around. Now, I happen to know that Trail Ridge is closed this summer for construction, as an FYI. But it's really important that you consider the time of year. Vice versa, if you're using paper only, it doesn't show you when a road is seasonal. So the Grand Canyon North Rim, for example, if you wanted to go there in March, you're not going to be able to go because that road is still closed for the winter. So in addition to using your typical routing systems, I recommend using the park websites to make sure that you're double checking for closures and seasonal dates. And then the other thing, if you're going to be using, especially if you're doing boondocking and Forest Service areas where you're navigating Forest Service roads, bring a atlas, the DeLorme Gazetteer, and the Forest Service or BLM motorized travel maps are very useful for those areas. I'm seeing Todd say that need to preview the day before because we learned the hard way. Yes. Yep. I agree with that. I always like to preview. I love looking at paper or atlas before I leave on my trips. I do too. As a matter of fact, I have the National Geographic topographic, like hiking maps that are illustrated, and I love those before I go to a park. Even if I'm not going to be hiking, they're great because they show you things that don't show up on other maps and really give you a sense of the terrain in a way that even if you turn on the Google Maps terrain feature, you don't get that level of detail. So I agree with that. So I'm curious, when it comes to apps, are there any other trip planning apps that you use? I find it can be a bit of a chicken and an egg, whether I'm, planning the route or picking my destinations first. I'm going to catch up. Yeah, I've used RV Parky as well, Pat. I pretty much use all the apps at one time or another in different ways, and I'll sometimes go to multiple apps because they do show you different information. Dawn uses Allstays. Allstays, from what I understand, is great if you have an iPhone. I don't even believe they offer it for Android anymore. When I first started camping, they did, but it wasn't very good. And I think that it has been discontinued for Android. But I know the iPhone users love the Allstays app. So what I do when I start a trip plan is I usually start with one or more locations, and then I start just sketching or mocking up a rough draft of the trip. And I then start experimenting. I add different routes. I try different lengths of travel days, staying at different campgrounds, adding and removing points of interest. What would it look like if I stopped somewhere for groceries? Where can I find a Walmart on the way? And then, of course, where I want to spend the night. Yeah, Scott, I use Campendium too. It's one of my favorites. Usually once I pull up a Google map and start experimenting, I'll also open a notebook and just start creating a draft itinerary and experimenting with that. I like to use OneNote because I can share it with other people easily. Because it saves to the web, it syncs between my phone and my desktop seamlessly. It's also searchable, and I do like that it makes it easy to copy and paste into an Excel spreadsheet or a Word doc if I want to share that with other people. So, one thing I've learned is that you can really, the one thing about this time of year, I feel like it's dangerous for two reasons. One, I spend a lot of money ordering from Amazon on things I think I need in January when I probably don't. And then second, I start just getting crazy with my trip plans. Now, I've learned to settle down a bit, but scope creep is a real thing and it can happen. So be cautious. Karen loves her Harvest Hosts and Boondockers Welcome membership. That's awesome. I know a lot of people really benefit from those. It really hasn't. I had Harvest Host for a couple of years. It wasn't a great fit for me, but I know many people really do well. Bonnie uses RV Trip Wizard. Driving option or driving radius option allows me to create a min and max number of miles. Oh, that is nice, Bonnie. That's a great feature. So I'm curious. The other thing I always try to avoid are if there are big events in an area. So in Moab, every Easter they have Jeep Week, and it's just packed to the gills. In Sturgis, South Dakota, which is near Custer State Park, the Badlands, Rapid City, Devil's Tower, they have this massive motorcycle rally every year, the Sturgis Rally. And even in July, if you're there, you can start to see the increase of motorcycles. So I have nothing against motorcycles. It's just the crowds I'm trying to avoid. I try to avoid that area in August. Things are calm by September usually. I'll also avoid a city or try to adjust my driving times if I know there's a large home football game. Like Penn State, for example, if you're near State College at all on Interstate 99, traffic is a nightmare if there's a home football game. Have any of you run into traffic from large events, or are there large events you try to avoid when you travel? Catching up on my comments here. So choosing what you do at the destinations, for some of you, is going to come pretty easily. Like I know Scott mentioned earlier, he looks for good trails. He probably has apps, school vacations. Oh, good point, Julia. I do try to avoid the school vacations. Nothing like July in Yellowstone to make one crazy. Let me just say that. Dawn, yes, Columbus, any home game or concert. So I'm curious, for those of you who don't, for example, hike or bike and don't have apps that you use to find those activities already, maybe you're just looking for sightseeing ventures, how do you find activities or points of interest when you're traveling? Do you use Google? Do you use, what's the one that used to be? TripAdvisor used to be a real big one. Yelp, I know, is another big one for finding activities or points of interest. Personal recommendations, yes. Yes, Steve and Karen Thole have a section of their website about different areas they visited with a lot of that detail. Stay away from Laconia, New Hampshire during bike week. That makes sense to me. My brother used to live in New Hampshire, so I'm familiar with that event as well. Don't like going through big cities when traveling, like to go around on the outskirts on older highways. That is really helpful when you can. I know Chicago can turn into a bear even when you're sort of bypassing it on I-80 and going to the south. The traffic can really line up there. So I found, in addition to just doing regular old Google searches, I'll sometimes do a Google image search, and that will lead me down a whole nother rabbit hole. Stop at local visitor areas. That's a really good idea. Sometimes you can find a talkative local at one of those that will give you some inside secrets and tell you the places that the crowds won't be. So that's a really good tip. Atlanta is murder. Yeah, I do not like Atlanta, Pat. Reviews on RV Trip Wizard has an excellent information on destination things to do. Another one that I've recently started experimenting with, and I haven't done a full subscription yet, is an app called Audio. It used to be called Here Here. It's a Kevin Costner app, and it gives you like just narratives, audio narratives about different areas that you're in, and gives you information. So, and some of the destinations have celebrity voices doing that, which is always nice. I mean, I'm not huge into celebrities, but they usually know how to narrate pretty well. You love Audio, Bonnie. Great. HipCamp. Yeah, I know Net's used HipCamp before. So speaking of destinations, you may want to add other nuCampers to your list as options when you're traveling. If you haven't, how many of you have downloaded the nuCamp app? I'm curious. I know I have. And it does give you the ability to connect with other owners, to trip journal plan, support documentation. It has nuCamp contact information. It's one of those, I think, under the radar type of resources that people haven't found yet. I got really excited when I was in Custer State Park last year because it showed that there was another nuCamp person in the park. So I went to find them, but it looked like they had already left, so I missed them. It was a little disappointing that they were already gone. But I have started liking it. Yeah, there were some issues when it first launched, Pat, but I think they've taken care of those. Um, you know, Another way is through events. I know some of you have been to rallies with Mandy Lee and Kendrick. We have a camping get together with Ohio and Pennsylvania for the solar eclipse coming up. We have the Turkey Run camping get together that I know a number of you are coming to. Yay. We have uCamp coming up, and if you haven't been to uCamp, put it on your list, even if it's a big trip someday to make it out to uCamp because it is pretty awesome. We also have 2 more live streaming events coming up, a boondocking workshop next month. And then the week after the boondocking workshop, I'm going to be hosting a live stream for members only that's solar and battery. So if you're interested in that, you do need to be a member. It doesn't matter what level of membership, all members can attend, but it is a members only workshop. But all this talk about camping makes me want to talk about how we find campgrounds. Um, we've mentioned a bunch of these, right? Campendium, All Stays. Another one people like is The Dirt. I've used it. I still prefer Campendium personally, but I think it's like your favorite color. Everybody's going to have a favorite. The National Park Service websites have the most detail usually about their campgrounds, even when they're, supported by vendors. RV Parky. The KOA app I've used increasingly, especially when I'm just doing a night. And as public campgrounds start to fill up, I've spent more nights in KOAs. And then Good Sam's. Nice events. Yeah, I see a lot of people on here who are going to the Turkey Run event, and I'm really excited about that. One thing that just want to point out a few considerations when you're talking about campgrounds. One is reservation windows. If you're newer to camping, reservation windows aren't something that just naturally occur to you, right? I didn't know anything about it. I'd go to a park website, I'd try to make a reservation and say all the campsites are full. And I'd be like, how can all the campsites be full this far in advance? Well, they weren't full. They just weren't open for reservation yet, and they appeared full. So they have what's called a reservation window, and that's how far in advance you can reserve. And it's not always apparent. You do sometimes have to do a little digging. Another thing is check to make sure a campground's open for the season and not closed for maintenance. That's happened to me on more than one occasion where a campground I've wanted to stay at is closed for the year. Look for seasonal dates, especially if you do any shoulder season traveling like I do. Some campgrounds have maximum stay lengths. You can only stay for 10 or 14 days. Yes, don't wait too long to reserve. It's so hard to find campsites these days. Pet restrictions, and that can be not only if pets are allowed, but in some campgrounds, it's what breed you have. And I know that's true in Canada. Canada restricts certain breeds. So if you're planning a trip to Canada, that's something to bear in mind. Water, whether you need water, sewer, or electric. I look at campground reviews, and most of these apps have reviews. Amenities, sometimes I need amenities, sometimes I don't. Probably the most common I look for is laundry facilities. Hidden costs to be aware of, like park entrance fees. Sometimes state parks, you have to pay an additional per day entry fee. Resort fees or taxes. And then another thing that you may run into, there can be restrictions on campgrounds based on the length of your trailer. There was one campground in Breckenridge, Colorado, where mine was too short. The age of the trailer, if it's over certain many years old, sometimes 10 is the year. The age of the person. So people under 55 can't camp at certain campgrounds. So I'm curious, I just listed a lot. What did I forget? What did I forget that you consider when you do a campground search? I'm going to catch up on the comments while you respond.
Jen, look at Yvonne and Julia.
Same question. I am already a member. So a subscriber and a member are slightly different. Subscribe is free, doesn't cost anything. It's open to everybody. Membership is a new program introduced by YouTube within the last year where you can subscribe, you can become a member of a channel, and there are different, I have, for example, 3 tiers, and that those tiers entitle you to different benefits. Nat, can you put the link back in the chat for them? Because if you follow the link, it'll take you to the part of my channel that shows you the different perks at the different levels. So the solar battery one is for members only. Roz is now anti-Canada. Yeah, I know Canada doesn't allow pit bulls, and some parks. And I think usually when it's the park, it's the insurance company behind the park, unfortunately. So it's not great. All right. So, what else do people need to think about when they're choosing a campground besides how cute their tab will look at the campground? I'm just going to give you some of my lessons learned. I keep track of my reservations in either a notebook or a calendar. I used to just do a notebook, but I've switched to adding it right to my calendar, and that way it syncs between my phone and desktop. I add the campground, the site number, and the check in and check out time right to the calendar details. That way I don't have to fumble around for it. I also keep reservation confirmations in subfolders by month in my inbox so that they're easy to find. I've never not had a reservation at a campground when I made one. Like, that's always worked, but just in case for some reason I show up and they say they don't have me. If it looks like there are no sites, make sure you're not outside of the reservation window. Find out which campgrounds fill up early. That's what Nat, you were talking about earlier. I just did that with friends. We booked reservations for a few campgrounds that will fill up pretty quickly. Learn to read a campground map. When I first started camping, I could not read a campground map, and you pay the price. You don't get the best sites. Do you want to be near the bathroom? Do you want to avoid being near the playground? We camp with a friend who does not like kids, so not camping. So she avoids camping near the playground if she can. Do you need to be near the dog park, the storm shelter, the laundry, those type of things? Sometimes if you call a commercial campground like a KOA, not only they might have sites that don't show up online, but I found when I have a conversation with people and they find out what kind of camper I have, they seem to try harder to give me a nicer site. Yeah, I see Michigan campgrounds get filled up 6 months in advance. Are there trains running through the campground? Karen, were you talking about the Lake Louise campground in Banff National Park, where trains go through the campground all day and all night? Nat, that's a good one. With her rental, I couldn't drive any distance on unpaved roads. Yep. Watch out for interstate proximity. I stayed at a couple KOAs while traveling last year just for quick overnights that were, right next to the highway. And I stayed at one campground last summer where the interstate billboards was right, like probably 100 feet from my campsite. So those are good tips. Look at the map. Another tip, if you're going to be doing laundry, especially at a KOA, you let them know that you want to have a site close to the laundry facility. That way you don't have to unhook if you've got heavy laundry. The other thing is ask for your change when you check in. A lot of times you don't think about change till you go to do your laundry and they're closed and you're stuck. So ask for change when you check in. I've started taking a photo of both my Jeep and my trailer license plate because every once in a while a campground wants your license plate. I don't know what they do with that information. My guess is nothing, but they've been asking for it so long, they just always ask for it. But if you have a picture on your phone, it makes it easier. You don't have to run back out and get it. And if you don't know this, you don't have to unhook from your tow vehicle, especially for one night. If you're not going to be driving and it doesn't bother you, stay connected. You don't have to put your stabilizers down. Dawn has taught me that well. And it does simplify your trips a lot. I'm going to catch up on some of the comments here. Oh, the campground on the Canadian side of the Niagara Falls. Now we look at Google Earth. That's smart. Yeah, the Lake Louise in Banff is another one. There is a train that goes right through the campground. Charlie travels with a roll of quarters. I always start out with a bunch of quarters, but I also burn through them. So inevitably, I need additional quarters. So, the other thing, you start making campground reservations, you start spending money. So, I think it's a good time to talk briefly about budgeting. I typically look at four categories of budgeting. One is gas, and that for me is usually the most expensive because I put a lot of miles on in a trip. The other is camping. Unless you're staying at a expensive RV resort for a lengthy period of time, gas is probably going to be your most expensive, but camping can get up there if you like full hookups and like your more RV resort type of places. Food, I find food to be very similar to my food budget at home, quite honestly. If anything, I save a little money. And then miscellaneous is a big one. Entrance fees and parks passes, tolls, propane, trip insurance. But the big thing is unplanned incidents. Like last year, I had a tire blowout and I had to buy a new tire. Um, so you have to sort of plan for the things that could go wrong. To do that, I like to pad those budget projections by about 10 to 20% more in each category. And don't forget to account for things like your tow vehicle maintenance, your camper maintenance, house or pet sitters, and similar costs when you're projecting. Usually you just focus on the trip and then it's time to go and you're like, oh, I need an oil change. Oh, I actually need new tires. Oh, I forgot I have to have this done. So those are some things. I usually throw in haircuts for me and Rocky before I go. Um, I usually project my mileage with Google Maps and then figure out how many gallons I'm going to need based on my average miles per gallon. And then I usually get the average price of gas. One thing I'll say about gas is the price can vary from state to state largely. You've got, I would say the most expensive are Canada, which is not a state, it's a country. I know that. California, Pennsylvania, and New York are typically among the most expensive. The Midwest, especially upper Midwest, seem to be among the cheaper. Once you get into the remote areas like Colorado, the Intermountain West, that gets sort of expensive again because it's more remote. And it can be a bit of a sticker shock if you're not used to it. Mamie has one credit card specifically for camping so I can track expenses. That's a great idea. With KOA license plate, be sure you don't have visitors that haven't paid their visitor fee. Oh, yeah, some campgrounds, we've run into that, make, I see. They do the license plate to check for visitors. I didn't realize that. Thanks, Julia. That didn't occur to me. I have stayed at campgrounds where my visitors had to pay to come in, which I hate. Like, why? Especially if they're not gonna. I get it if they're using the pool or whatever, but if they're not, it's a real pain. So, um, anything else you think of when it comes to budgeting? Am I forgetting anything? I found last year, thankfully, for the first time, I underspent. I came in well under budget. I don't usually go over budget. I'm usually pretty close, but last year I was very much under. Two cats and it is an added expense to have a house and a cat sitter for every trip when you are gone for a week plus. Yes. Most KOAs. Now, my experience is that hasn't been true of most KOAs. Um, but I'm also staying at a lot of KOA holidays because they're close to the highway. They're one night stays. Or, I'm sorry, the KOA journeys. Maybe the KOA holidays and resorts probably have that license plate thing. Pat doesn't budget, he just goes. We're not all independently wealthy, Pat. I'm teasing Pat. I know he's not either. But I think you do get some experience where you do have to think about it a little less. Every year I go, for example, I for the trip I have this fall, I already know without doing the Google Maps thing, about how much mileage that trip will be. I have a pretty good estimate. And based on that, I know approximately how much I need to budget for gas. So you do get experienced at budgeting and projecting those costs. Maybe the key is we need to travel with Pat so he can cover all of our expenses. Cindy says, no extra expense here. Cats camp with me. They do. As a matter of fact, I've met Cindy's cats, and Cindy picks up cats at campgrounds. That has its own set of expenses, if I remember, Cindy. I think Sophie cost you a fair amount of money. Fanny says, my budgeting was buying the trailer. Is a lot cheaper than a hotel or cabin. The rest I would spend it anyway. It's true. Once you get over the initial investment of a camper, it is cheaper than hotels. My sister-in-law, actually, we have a family wedding out west this year, and she started pricing hotels in some of those areas, and she had major sticker shock. And she said, now I understand why you camp. And it did have a lot to do with why I got into camping. And I started with just camping in like the camper cabins at commercial campgrounds. And then I moved to a rooftop tent. And then I moved to my tab. So I hear you. The cost is real. Other thing about budgeting is to me it's sort of a game. Like how good am I at projecting and predicting it? There are some people I know who get a lot more detailed than I do, and they get very detailed in their gas mileage and their logs, and they're really the data geeks. I'm probably somewhere in the middle. I like to track it enough so that I'm keeping myself out of trouble, and that I'm able to project what I'm going to spend, but I don't I don't keep track of all those things. I do keep track of how many nights I camp, but Pat knows his limits. Gas, I have no choice. Exactly. You start to become a little more knowledgeable about your budget when you do this a few times. So, speaking of unplanned incidents, one thing you should count on is that things will not go as planned. And that I think we've all experienced that. When it happens, you can pause and say, there it is. I knew it was going to happen on this trip. Something wasn't going to go as planned. Sometimes it's more than one thing. Sometimes it feels like it's the whole trip, but don't let that ruin your experience. That really is the experience. Life isn't flawless. Neither are we. We can't expect ourselves or our campers or the campground, the views, the crowds, any of it to be flawless. We'll just be disappointed. You really have to embrace it for all it is, and your trip will be a lot more enjoyable. Pat shelled out $200 today to have his wheel bearings packed. Yeah, that price has gone up over the last few years. Any maintenance has gone up. Labor's gone up. Parts and supplies have gone up. I do that. I call it my well visit to nuCamp, to the service center every year. Mine's coming up in February, and I'll have my bearings packed. I have them do a safety inspection to make sure brakes and tires and everything's in good working condition. I have them check the caulking and the seals to make sure I'm not going to have water intrusion. Before a trip, I also make sure I've had an oil change, and if my tires need to be rotated, I do that. Your tires are the one thing, if you're doing a long trip, you really need to pay attention to. I know I had a blown tire. I asked the tire guys any indication on why that was, and they really were not clear. nuCamp doesn't have a tire machine, so they can't replace tires. Last I knew, that could have changed, so check with them. But they would have to replace the wheel and the tire. They get the tires on the wheels when they get it at the factory. So last year I ordered two trailer tires online. So the tire that blew was a fairly new tire. It was a Goodyear endurance tire. And I had a mobile tire installer come and install them right at my house for my tab. And he did a great job. Unfortunately, that tire blew, but the tire maintenance is something that's important. A lot of people use discount tires or other local tire shops. It doesn't have to be a trailer place, But if you do want to use a trailer place, a utility trailer shop can be another great place to look. I know before nuCamp Service Center was available for just general maintenance, I used to let a utility trailer shop pack my bearings and do my safety inspections for me. Underinflation is the biggest reason for blowouts. Yeah, proper inflation is critical. Jen, do you take your tab to nuCamp for maintenance or do you have someone local? I live just a little about 2 hours from nuCamp, so I just go to nuCamp. I know that I'm getting the best eyes on my camper at nuCamp, and so it's not that much of an I actually enjoy going. I usually go the night before and stay in a courtesy site. And I love being in Sugar Creek. It's such a nice little community with great food. So but before nuCamp was an option, I did go to a local trailer utility place for repairs. So that's a huge thing. There is a lot you can prevent. I knew with the amount of miles I put on my trailer, was an inevitability that I would probably have a tire blowout someday. And I used to wonder what that would be like. I wasn't paranoid about it. I at a at one of the solo sessions a couple of years ago, I asked people what their biggest fear when on a trip was, and the number one answer was a tire blowout. Like, that was such a bad question to ask because everybody got obsessed about tire blowouts. But it really wasn't as scary as you might think. It was obvious when it happened. There was a loud sound, and I quickly glanced to my side mirror and saw smoke coming from the tire. I was able to I was already in the right lane, and I was going slow. I've slowed down in recent years driving to save gas money. So I pulled over and called Good Sam, and the Good Sam guy. No, I did not lose control in that. The Good Sam guy came within a half an hour, and he changed my tire. He had changed one other tab tire, so he was familiar with the whole setup and how to get to the jack point. And I drove on down the road, found a tire shop that had the same tire in stock, and they were able to squeeze me in. You also don't drive 75 miles an hour. Right. I used to. I used to drive really fast when I towed, but the last 2 to 3 years I've slowed down. Not only do you get better mileage, but I feel less tired when I'm driving a little slower. And also, I think it feels a little safer. I had my trailer come apart from the ball and falling on the road. It was horrible. Thank God I was going maybe 15 miles per hour when it happened. Fanny, I had that happen to me once too. And it was because I was new to towing and I didn't have the coupler latched properly. And I was on a pretty steep slope and I thought, how am I ever going to get this up? And this guy in a landscaping truck just trotted over and picked it up and put it on the ball for me. So that was all. Thankfully, I didn't have damage. I'm glad you didn't get hurt, Fanny. Did you have damage from it? Yes, Julia, you have the picture of the jack point in your trailer in case the tow vehicle, just in case. I was able to pull up from the nuCamp support desk, if you've used their support site, a picture of the jack point and show him, but he did know from his previous experience. But it is a good idea to have a picture of that to show whoever might be changing the tire. I do know how to change a tire. I prefer not to. I prefer to let those other people who are paid to do it. I have had Good Sam for several years. I had a bad experience and was going to cancel them, and I just never got around to it. I also have roadside assistance for my car and my trailer through my insurance carrier. I spray painted the jack point yellow. Oh, that's brilliant. I like that idea. But the rear bumper got hit. Yes, I think mine did too, but I didn't get any damage, Fanny. No damage to the trailer. That's awesome. I do like that idea. You could also probably put a decal if you didn't want to spray paint it. Get a nice bright colored decal so that it's easy for people to see. See, did I miss anybody else's comments? Great. So I think that wraps up the most of tonight. Good Sam has helped you twice in 9 years. Yep, they've helped me twice too, and both times they helped me, they did a great job. The one time I ran out of gas for the first time in my life, and as soon as I got on the call, the dispatcher or whoever I talked to spent the entire time trying to make me feel like I was unsafe so that she could dump my call and tell me to call the police. It was so bizarre. But maybe that was a one-off. I hope that, in other words, if they try to ask you if you feel unsafe, the answer is you feel safe. Unless you're legitimately life in danger, tell them you feel safe, because they're just trying to pass it off to the police if they do that. But any other questions before I wrap it up? Because I do want to give you a link for the resource that I told you I would share with you. Scott's going to add yellow paint to his camping budget. We'll let Scott go around and paint everybody's jack point at nuCamp yellow or at Turkey Run. How does that sound, Scott? I can't paint to save my life. I think I will just get like fluorescent tape or something and put there. But I like that idea a lot. Net's going to put a link in the chat because I promised you a surprise. And the surprise is I'm going to make a copy of these slides available for download. And then I've also created a travel planning template that has some space for creating a draft itinerary, some budget, some brainstorming. And Net's going to put those links in the chat so that you can download. Thanks everybody who joined and for being so interactive. And Net, thank you for joining and helping tonight. Appreciate it. Sorry you had some audio difficulties there. But thanks again. Hopefully we'll do this again next month. Have a great night, everybody.